All right, welcome back again. Part 5, removing the mask. Again, this year is sponsored by Eitan Barak as it's Chus for Yehonatan, Dov, Mordechai, Daniel, Eliezer, Bnei Shmuel, Susan. And Hashem should return them to their families speedily and grant them a Yeshua. We finished off last time. We ran out of time. We hit the buzzer. But we were in the middle of a very fascinating topic. And B'ezras Hashem, we're going to finish that tonight and go a little bit deeper into a new layer and perhaps get into Purim a little bit, as it is Shushan Purim Katan tonight. So we were holding and trying to understand why Hashem created the world with so many different creatures. And we did establish the ground rules that this world, as we mentioned many times, the whole point of the shir is a reflection of higher spiritual realities that exist in the higher realms. More specifically, the midos of Hashem, that the different qualities and characteristics of HaKadosh Baruch Hu exist in these higher worlds, which we call the Ma'aseh Merkava, which we call the Be'ikr, the 10 spheros, the 10 different spheres, the 10 attributes of Hashem. And that is what Hashem uses to project himself into this world. And not only does he use the 10 spheros, but the 10 spheros are like 10 primary colors. And you can mix all the different spheres together to make an infinite number of colors. So just like you can have an infinite number of colors, therefore, if this world is a reflection of the attributes of Hashem, and there's an infinite number of attributes due to the various mixtures you can create, so therefore there needs to be an infinite reflection of Hashem in the world, in the natural world, which is animals, plants, minerals, which we said. That's why it should very well be that man will never cease to discover new species of life on earth. Because even though we assume that earth is finite, but we know that Hashem's midos are infinite. And since on earth there's a reflection of Hashem's infinitude, so therefore there should be an infinite number of species in the world. So mankind is going to continue discovering new species every single year. So that's what we covered up until last time. We went a little deeper, but now we're going to try to answer question number 3 on our sheets. Why do the Torah, Tanakh, and Ghazal love using animal and plant metaphors? Is God a poet? So very often, if you read the English translation of the Torah, so yeah, it sounds like God's a poet, because they write it in old school English, and it waxes poetic, and it sounds very nice. But we know that the Torah is not just a book, and certainly not just a piece of poetry, although it can be beautiful. The Torah is one with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kuchbrichu v'araisa v'Yisrael chadu. The Zohar says they're all one. So the Torah is one with Hashem. So anything that's written in the Torah is an expression of the Ratzon Hashem and of the attributes of Hashem. Not only that, we also mentioned even a level deeper, is that the Torah is the lens through which Hashem projects himself into reality. Istako be'araisa ubara alma. The Zohar says that Hashem looked into the Torah and created the world. And the common way that's translated is the Torah is a blueprint for reality. So anything you find in the Torah will be expressed in the physical world. One of the famous examples of this is that the Torah only mentions 5 animals that have one kosher sign but not the other. Either they chew their cud or they have split hooves, one but not the other. And zoologists have looked around and studied many, many animals, and they've only found these 5. And yes, there's a kangaroo that's a machlokes. I've heard that one is a maybe, has one but not the other, but there are 5. So they say, wow, it's so amazing. The Torah must be true. It knew that there are only 5 animals that have one attribute but not the other. So while that's very nice, it's actually backwards. It's backwards because it's not that the Torah knew that there were 5 animals that have one attribute but not the other. It's that there are only 5 animals in the world that have one attribute not the other because the Torah said so. Because the Torah said so, not the Torah knew, right? Like with the mashal we use many, many times. If you have a screen that is projecting through a lens an image onto the screen, so if someone looked at the screen and said, wow, such a beautiful picture, and they go up to look at the lens and they say, wow, it's so cool, this lens knew what was going to be on the screen. So obviously he has it backwards, right? What's on the screen is because of the lens. So the Torah is the lens. So the Torah defines reality. Yehivatat says it nicely that very often you'll find religions worship certain animals that are kosher. We see the Egyptians worship sheep, and in India they worship cows because in a weird way they're noble creatures. They're herbivores and they are gentle, and I don't know, for some reason people think they have this mystique to them. Then you have these disgusting animals that nobody worships, these bottom feeders like shrimp and lobsters and cockroaches and all these, and strutzim, lizards and snakes. So nobody really is worshiping these animals. So why is that? Because these animals are disgusting. So why are these animals disgusting? So people will say, oh, some non-Jews think that eating kosher is healthy because you're only eating the healthy animals that don't eat the carcasses and the disgusting things in the world. Right? Cows, they eat grass, they don't eat dead animals. But bottom feeders, they'll eat dead animals. Shrimp, they'll eat all the dead sea creatures. So it's nice to keep kosher. Kosher animals are clean. So they have it again backwards. It's not nice that these animals happen to not eat decaying meat. It's that because they're kosher, they are noble. They're ennobled. These animals act a certain way because they're kosher. Like pigs roll in filth. Cows don't roll in their own filth. A pig is disgusting because he's not kosher. Because he's not kosher, he's disgusting. It's not that we don't eat him because he's disgusting. It's that since we don't eat him because he's not kosher, therefore he acts disgusting. Right? The shrimp and all these cockroaches, these strutzim, you perceive them as disgusting because the Torah says they're not kosher, so they therefore become disgusting. Therefore, by nature, they're disgusting, and they disgust human beings. So this is just an idea of how the Torah is really the source for all of these things. So this applies to all natural creatures that exist in the world. So we see here in the Mishnah in Avos. So this is an example of a place where Torah waxes poetic. It says, Yehuda ben Beseira Omer, Have az kenamer, you should be bold like a leopard, I think is an amer. What? Yehuda ben Tema Omer. Have az kenamer, be bold like a leopard, v'kal kenesher, and light like an eagle, v'ratz ketzvi, and fleet like a deer, v'gibor ka'ari, and powerful like a lion, Lasos Ratzon Avicha Shebashamayim, to do the will of your Father in heaven. Okay, that is the most ambiguous statement I've ever heard. It doesn't even mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. I mean, the adjectives make a little bit of sense. You should be az, you should be bold or brazen when you serve Hashem. You should be kal, you should be light, you should be fleet, you should be quick, and you should be powerful. But why did the Mishnah have to waste its time on giving us metaphors for each of these? Why did it have to compare it to an animal? You could have just said, be powerful, be quick, whatever it is, and then the Ghazal will tell us what these things mean and elaborate on them. Why did it have to give animals to describe these things? And again, we mentioned last time that if you look in Navi, when you look at the Nevuas, that the prophecies that the Nevi'im saw, they're always very strange. A lot of different animals battling with each other and intermingling with each other, and sometimes it's half one animal, half another animal. So you have all these weird phenomenon with animals happening in the Torah. And we said earlier in the previous year, and I think this is where we left off, and now remembering we didn't fully explain a topic, but it's not on the sheet, is that there was this concept called Malchus. We said Malchus bepeh. That Malchus is in the mouth, and then we got into the whole discussion of Dibur, that speech is the faculty which takes thoughts and it packages them, and it translates them into something much more physical and much more tangible, which is speech, which are words. It takes thoughts, which are abstract and expansive, and it limits and packages them into words, which are concrete, which you can communicate and deliver to another person, but obviously they don't have the same infinitude and the same expression as the thought. The thought has so much more than the word, but you can't communicate the thought, so you have to package it into a word. So Malchus, which I think we ended last time, we didn't even get to this point, but Malchus is this mechanism that Hashem created to convert spirituality into physicality. It's the last of the spheros. Again, we said the spheros Chachma Bina Das, Chesed Gvura Tiferes, Netzach Hod Yesod, Malchus. Malchus are the feet. Malchus is the very bottom. So all these spiritual forces trickle down the system. It gets to this magnetic field, this spiritual field called Malchus, and when you push it through, it pops out on the other side as physicality. Malchus translates thought into speech. It translates the Ratzon Hashem, the thoughts of Hashem, into the speech of Hashem. And we know, Ba'asara Maimaros Nivra Ha'olam, that Hashem created the world with 10 sayings. If you look in Bereshis, it's always Vayomer Elokim, because Hashem spoke the world into existence. What does that mean? So he used Malchus Charuvanecha, yeah. Malchus Kol Olamim. That's another idea that Malchus is really the bottom of every world. There's many different worlds, many different 10 spheres, like I mentioned last time. The bottom of everyone is Malchuscha. Malchus is always the bottom of Kol Olamim. Malchus Kol Olamim. All the different worlds, Malchus is the last stage, which is going to take that spiritual concept and it's going to translate it into a lower level. The last Malchus translates things into physicality, but let's remember that we said there are many worlds, there are infinite worlds. There's this very serious mechanism called the Maisa Merkava, that's this trickle down of spirituality that goes through all these chains of 10 spheres. The bottom of every chain of 10 spheres is Malchus, and that's like a hook that goes into the top of the next level, and then it trickles down to another Malchus, another Malchus. The last Malchus, that's why Malchus Kol Olamim. Hashem's Malchus is the Malchus that trickles down through all worlds. The last one translates that spirituality into physicality. It turns things into physical objects, which was the whole point of last time's shir. So Malchus is this concept that accomplishes that goal. That's a mechanism called Malchus. They said Malchus B'Peh, and think about it, that has to do with kingship. That's what a king is supposed to be. A king is supposed to translate or kind of conglomerate, if that's a word, aggregate all of the colors of his entire nation. All of his subjects are supposed to be unified within the king, and he's supposed to express all of those in one individual. So this Malchus is taking, we said Malchus is leis de megar me klum. It's the only sphere that has no identity of its own. It's like a holding tank. It takes all the other forces and then it just kind of aggregates them and then projects them into the world. That's what a king should be. Right? Everybody thinks democracy is the ideal form of leadership. Right? So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter says that in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, in the Perek Chelek, it says that the generation of Mashiach will be Pnei Hador ke Pnei HaKelev. That the face of the nation will be like the face of a dog. It doesn't really elaborate on what that means. So what does Yisrael Salanter say? He says, what's a dog? What's unique about a dog? So these are good things. We don't like dogs in Judaism. In the Torah is not so fond of dogs. It's not so fond of dogs. So what is it? It's ravenous, and it has a lot of, first of all, it's very brazen. A dog will act like a person. Most animals will not jump up on the table and start eating from your plate. Most animals, I don't know, my cats usually don't unless you're not there, but like in front of your face. He thinks he's a person. He'll lick your face. Most animals have a little bit of respect for human beings. Dogs, they think they're people. And people actually think they're people also because they put them into clothing and take them to restaurants. Well, by the way, there's a very deep thing in that. We'll get to that in a minute. Remind me to say what that is. But there's a very deep thing that the generation is actually treating dogs like people. 50 years ago, imagine someone was walking a dog down the street and it was wearing a sweater. You would think that person is insane. That person with their dog in the sweater is insane. You would laugh him off the street and you say, are you insane? You're dressing up your dog in clothing? Now, if your dog doesn't have a sweater, people are like, he's so cold, are you crazy? Taking your dog out without a sweater? He's not even wearing shoes. What if he steps on rocks? He'll hurt his feet.
Just give me an idea.
It's pretty wild. So what's happening? That the generation is actually, right, what's happening? We're believing the dogs. Dogs think they're people. The generation is so confused. It can't tell the difference between men and women. And it can't tell the difference between people and dogs. People and animals. That's why you have animal rights. Right? But to a certain extent, they want animals to have equal rights to humans. Of course, we're against animal cruelty, but animal rights is not necessarily a Torah concept. They don't have rights; they're not people. They don't have free will. They have rights. But animal rights started as a good movement against animal cruelty, but it grew to this thing where animals are people. What's the difference? We can't even differentiate between animals and people. So maybe that's one explanation of Pnei Hador ke Pnei HaKelev, that we don't see the difference between people and animals, just like a dog doesn't, we don't. And that's right before Mashiach, just remember. But another explanation Shlomo Salanter says, is he says, a dog, when you walk in, he pretends like he's leading the walk. Like he's deciding where to go. But if you notice, he always looks back to see where his master is going. He's really following you, but he wants to pretend that he's leading. So he walks ahead and he always constantly looks back. He says, that's going to be the leaders of the generation before Mashiach, i.e., democracy. Democracy is the best thing we've ever had because when we've left the government to monarchy, so generally bad people have taken charge because they're power hungry and those are the people that have risen to the top. But the ideal system is that the greatest individual alive with the greatest integrity and the greatest sense of morality should obviously be the leader. And generally that's going to be the person who does not want to be the leader. Because he's an anav, and he probably has all of the good attributes you want in a leader, so he wouldn't want to take the helm, but you'll kind of push him up into the limelight, like David HaMelech.
Yes,
They took him from the bottom.
He doesn't want the bizyanis.
Yeah, Evan Masu Abonim Haisel Rosh Pina. That was David HaMelech, that he was the stone that everybody abandoned, and he became He became the cornerstone. So that's what a leader should be. But in democracy, it's such a funny system because the leader is basically the guy that wants the power, but he has to look back to see what everybody else wants, right? Because he's only going to get to the top if he gets all your votes. So really, he has almost no mind of his own, and he's usually seeing what all the special interests do, how to make the most people happy, and then he becomes an aggregate of all of society, generally not leading society in the best direction. Usually the presidents we've had recently have not been models of integrity and morality. They might have been decent leaders, but...
And we're moving away from how to make the most people happy, and it's how do we make the most money happy.
It makes the most money happy as well. Yeah, democracy can work well, but it's the best we got. I'm not anti-democracy, 100% no. But in the Jewish concept of leadership, the leader is not a dog. He doesn't look back at what you want. He leads you in the right direction, and you have to follow.
It's what Aristotle also.
What?
So Aristotle also says in terms of the governments, the kingship, aristocracy, and then the democracy.
Yeah. So if you have the best person as king, so then kingship is great. That's a Jewish concept of kingship. So that's why the king is really, society doesn't determine who's the king. The king is supposed to reflect all the greatest attributes of society. And everything that people hold in the ideal, that's who should be the king. He should be the leader. So that's a concept of this malchus. So that's Pnei Hador and Pnei Hakelev, that it's going to be like this dog that's really a follower and not a leader. So it's an interesting concept. That's what Salanter says. Okay. So now, let's try to understand how to learn a Mishnah like this. Or how to learn any piece of Torah that starts giving all of these metaphors about animals and about plants and minerals. And it compares the Jewish people to all of these plants and things. What does it mean? Okay, so look at source number 2 here, the Ramak. This is Ramosha Cordovero. These are the prime Kabbalist and Sfas before the Arizal. And a Sefer Shira Koma. So he says, V'kach HaTorah. When the Torah trickles down and it makes its way down to us in the physical world, it's going to convert itself into physical imagery or physical concepts. So these initial spiritual forces are going to crystallize and manifest, and they're now going to be clothed in physical metaphors. And the wise person who knows, so he will understand that all of these physical concepts in Torah are really a nimshal. They're really a message within the mashal. They're really telling you something deeper. And he'll understand the depth of the physical thing that the Torah is using as its metaphor. Now, you might think that this is talking about the Mishnah that we just read, where it's literally using the animal as a metaphor. But that's not necessarily true. It's talking about the whole Torah. Even the things that are kipshuto, that are literal, and that are speaking about physical concepts, they're also speaking about spiritual concepts. I forgot to put it here, but there's a Zohar that says, Kol plugta de tanoi v'amorai al sisrei Torah. Forget the last word, but they were founded. Oh, Yizdu, that they're founded. That all of the machlokes, Tanaim and Amoraim, are actually expressions of the secrets of Torah. That when they're arguing about halacha, they're actually arguing about a spiritual concept and how it is supposed to manifest in this world. We mentioned before, Shivim Panim LaTorah, that the Torah has 70 different facets. It can be understood in many different ways. As it trickles down through the different worlds, it can exist on infinite planes before it gets to this world. Remember this, that only in this world are things limited to one reality. In the spiritual world, as you move away from this literal, defined, and limited world, things become less limited. They become much more infinite. So 1 plus 1 only has to equal 2 down here. Maybe 1 plus 1 equals 10 up there. Or maybe it can equal many different numbers. I don't know. Right? Things are not necessarily limited to a single reality. They can be multidimensional, multifaceted. So when we say in the Gemara, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim, that these and these are the words of Hashem, so you're in this world and you say that's not true. One said kosher, one said treif. It's one or the other, right? It's tameh or tahor. It's not both. One says mutter, one says aser. It's not both. It can't be both. So that's only down here. It's telling you that, no, these are both true. Which one is going to be manifested in this world? That depends. That actually depends on the Chachamim. we'll go just one deep concept to kind of give another layer, is that Hashem gave the power to the Chachmei Hador to paskin Torah. Now we think that means they can determine the spiritual laws, right? The religious laws. That's not what that means. It also means that. But Torah is one with Hashem. Torah is the Rachon Hashem. Torah is reality. Torah is the blueprint for reality. Torah is the lens through which Hashem projects reality into existence. So when you say that the Chachamim can decide Torah, they can paskin Torah, you're saying that they can also decide reality. They can determine reality. They can determine which one of those Divrei Elokim Chaim, which one of those dimensions of Torah actually is koveya and becomes manifested and fixed in this world. That's what they can decide. Rav Moshe Shapiro has an interesting idea. He says that try to see if I can remember the whole thing, but there's a machlokes as to whether a person who falls off a ship and you see him go underwater, and if he doesn't come back up, can you assume that he's dead? So can you assume that he's dead? So we paskin that if it's by a lake where you can see the shores and you don't see him come up, so you can assume that he's dead. If it's in the ocean, so you can't assume he's dead. This is very nogea for agunas, for if like the guy's married and the person falls off a ship and then he's not alive. So the Gemara brings a story where Rabbi Akiva fell off a ship and they didn't see him, and then they didn't see him and they sailed off, and then a week later, whatever it was, Rabbi Akiva showed up in the base medrash. Whoa, Rabbi Akiva, how did you survive? So he says, when the waves were going over my head was popping up a little bit. You didn't see me, but I was covered. I was covered by the waves. And therefore, he proved that we paskin that a person who falls off a ship, even if you don't see him come back up, so technically you can't be sure. Maybe he survived. So Moshe Shapiro explained that this machlokes, you think maybe it's being cruel to the woman who can't remarry now. Because she can't remarry. What do you mean? He fell off the ship. He didn't see him come back up. Why can't we assume he's dead? So he said that we're actually being merciful and having rachmanas on the man. Because if you said that if a person falls off a ship and you don't see him come back up, you can assume he's dead, that actually will kill him.
Yeah, well, you just give up at that point.
Well, that's the halacha. The halacha just said he's dead. If the halacha says he's dead, he's going to die. The halacha killed him. Says, right? The Chachamim said that you can assume he's dead. That means that Hashem will always make sure he dies. Because that's what the halacha is. That's what the reality of the situation is. If the halacha says that he's not dead, so you just gave him a chance to survive. Guess what? If he falls off a boat in a lake and you don't see him come back up, you just, Hashem, the Chachamim killed him. Basically, they said you can assume that he's dead. So therefore, the halachic reality is going to determine whether he can survive or not. Because that's the Torah of the world. And the Chachamim have that power. Achrei Rabin Lahatos, it goes by the majority. When we had the Sanhedrin, the majority of Chachamim would determine Torah. And Hashem would ratify it into reality. That's how the world existed at that point. So the whole Torah really exists in the spiritual worlds, and as it trickles down, it gets to this world. The Ramban says that the Torah, before it came into the world, was Kulo Shemos Hashem. It was a jumble. All the letters were mixed up, and it was all the names of Hashem. It was all the names of Hashem. As it comes down through the worlds, the letters rearrange themselves until you get the Torah that we have down here that's actually speaking about physical concepts. This will answer a very interesting Gemara that in the Gemara in Shabbos that says that when Moshe was Alol Amaram, so Moshe went up to get the Torah, so the angels were very upset, and they said, "Ma yilud isha beinenu? What's this son of that comes from a woman among us?" So Hashem said, grab onto my kisei hakavod and give them an answer. So what were the angels arguing? So the Gemara says they were arguing that they told Hashem, you can't give them the Torah. You can't give them the Torah. Let the Torah stay with us. The Torah is too holy. You're going to give the Torah to mankind. They're too corrupt. You can't give them the Torah. The Torah is too precious. So Hashem said, answer them. So Moshe said, what's written in the Torah? Kibud aveim. Do you guys have mothers and fathers that you're supposed to honor? So the angel says, no. Right? He goes through the Torah, Yitzias Mitzrayim, did you guys leave Mitzrayim? No. Says, Lo tachmod, you shouldn't have jealousy, do you guys have jealousy? No. He goes through the whole Torah and basically says, this Torah is completely irrelevant to you. It doesn't apply to you. So the angels are masking and they say, okay, Moshe, you can take the Torah. Right? He beat the angels. So what a silly argument, right? When we learn Gemara, right, we use our brains. It's not just a nice story. So what? The angels didn't know that the Torah wasn't relevant to them, right? They didn't know that they didn't have parents. They didn't know that they didn't eat matzah. They didn't know that they didn't have lulav and esrog. Like, what was this whole argument going on? What was the havamina? So the answer is that the Torah only looks like it does with matzah and lulav and esrog and parents when it hits this world. But there are infinite levels of Torah before you get to here. There's many different levels of Torah. And they're all much more infinite than this one. And they're all speaking about spiritual concepts. Until you get to the top and it's all Shemos of Hashem. It's all names of Hashem. Which names are attributes. It's all attributes of Hashem. Like we said, the 10 spheres are Hashem builds the world. Those are also the blueprints and the building blocks of the Torah. And that's how the world comes into existence. Right? So when you go up, so you see the angels have a whole different Torah that they learn. And we mentioned this last time, when it says that after a person dies, he can go to the Yeshiva Shel Mala, and that there's different Torah academies. There's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and there's Rabbi Eliezer, and all different ones. So, like, what are they learning there? They don't have bodies anymore. They can't even do the mitzvahs. They're arguing halachas that don't apply to them. So no, they're learning different levels of Torah, different dimensions of Torah. And guess what? The dimensions can go on forever. The experience of Olam Haba will be an experience of learning Torah to its ultimate depth. You can just keep on learning forever. That's why tzaddikim in this world, they're like, they're already living in Olam Haba, because that's all they want to do all day. That's all they do all day, is they just sit and learn Torah all day. So that's exactly what it's going to be like when they get to Olam Haba. They're just going to get to go to different places they've never been before.
So it's impossible to know everything. You can't be somebody
No,
who knows
Torah-
everything, because there's always more and more and more
Yeah,
and more.
the Torah is infinite. Rabbi Nachman always said that the highest level he reached was a level where he said, I know nothing. There was certain maisim that are in Likutei Sichos where all the Hasidim used to go visit Rabbi Nachman for like a Yom Tov, and he would come out of his room and he would sit there and he'd say like, why are you all here? I literally don't know anything. It's like, I know nothing. Look, I don't even understand why you're sitting here. And it wasn't like a cute joke. He meant it in a very serious way, that at that point he reached this level where he said, I literally know nothing. And whenever that happened, he suddenly had this insane hasaga, that he had this lightning bolt of inspiration, and suddenly he started revealing the deepest Torahs that he ever revealed. And he got in a tremendously good mood, and he would start singing songs and tell them to sing Nigunim, and he would sing along, even when he was very sick in his later years. So this is what happened. Because he reached a level where he kind of emptied himself out, and Hashem filled him up. And Moshe Rabbeinu is Anav Mikol Adam, so you empty yourself out, you can access levels of Torah that are maybe inaccessible to a person that's rooted in the physical world. The more physical you are, the more limited you are to one layer of Torah. The more you realize you don't know, or the more you can kind of think abstractly, like we said, the Sodei Torah are always levels, you're kind of going a little bit deeper, you kind of can see different dimensions of Torah. So here we were just saying that the Torah really exists on many different planes of existence. Ukvar pirashnu, after the three dots, ukvar pirashnu, ki ha'peulos ha'elyonos hem ruchaniyim dakos sfiros ne'etzalos v'ispashtu v'yardu madrega achar madrega. So we said that the higher acting mechanism are all spiritual, very abstract, subtle things, and they go down level after level. And then they come down to this world, and they take on a physical form. So someone who wants to, and this is an amazing concept. This is how you do it. He says, if you want to be lahafshit chomra, to undress the concepts, right? All the spiritual concepts are clothed in physical terminology. So if you want to undress them, and you want to see what they're really speaking about, so he says, "V'yaskil b'sichlo, yaskil b'sisrei haTorah, v'yavin b'tpunahi." So he says, you should think about the secrets of Torah, and you'll understand what these physical things mean. So how do you do that? Rutzoni limsor lecha klalim, kadei sheteda lahafshit chomrei hamashulim mitorasenu hakadosh. He said, now I'm going to give you some rules and some tools to undress the Torah, and to understand what these metaphors are really speaking about. Okay, in the bold. Now he's going to give us our lesson for the night. Vehine, keshetimtza shum mila b'milos torasenu hakadosha meshula l'shum mida mina midas. So when you find any word in our Torah that is compared or used as a metaphor to explain for a certain mida, for a certain attribute, hine taskil b'mila hahi ma inyana. So think about that word and what it's all about. Im hi miklal ba'alei chayim kigon shor. If it's an animal like an ox, or an aryeh, or a lion, b'kayotze. So what do? Habet b'sigulos habal chai hahu. So go to the zoo, or turn on Animal Planet, or National Geographic, and start watching that animal. The timtze yachas, and you'll find a certain relation between the animal and the words that it's describing. Kigon, Bal Rachamim, maybe it's a merciful animal. Bal Din, maybe it's a judgmental animal. Or Eze Inyan, or some other attribute of that animal and his nature. V'im hu miklal tzimchei ha'adama, or if it's a plant or a fruit, right? Like anyone read the Dvar Torah this week that was in the yarn that Klal Yisrael are compared to an olive. So what do you do if you want to understand what that means? Like, what does it mean that Ghazal say Klal Yisrael like an olive? Again, very ambiguous. You know why it's ambiguous? Because it means a lot of things. Because Ghazal aren't trying to tell you that Klal Yisrael are, I don't know, small and green, or that they're sour, right? It's trying to tell you a lot more than that. So what do you do? Re'eh b'teva ilan. So go look at that tree, or that fruit, or ha'esev, or that plant, or makom gedilaso, or even the place in which it grows, or alamayim, or biyovesh, or benakotzim, whether it's by the water, or in an arid, dry place, or among the thorns, ve'keyotze. Umisham tavin ha'inyanehu. That's how you understand Torah. That's how you understand Torah. Rav Wolbe used to tell, I'll tell you the story how it was told to me, but Rav Kellerman, who was my Rosh Kollel, so he was a big Talmud of Rav Wolbe. Rav Wolbe was a very interesting Ghazal, super genius, but he was also very wise in the ways of the world. Very interesting Torah mind. And Rav Kellerman, that year, he had been learning in yeshiva he was a Baal Tshuva, and this was his first experience learning full-time in yeshiva, in a kollel, and he was really immersing himself into it. And that year, he felt like his learning had reached like a new high point. And he was actually able to understand every Tosfos, but he was also really moved by them and couldn't fall asleep until he figured them out. So he felt like he was really in a good place. So it came time for Bein Hazmanim, and he went to his Rebbe and said, Rebbe, I want to not take off this Bein Hazmanim. I want to stay in Kol. I want to learn straight through. He says, I don't need it. I don't feel like I need the break. I'm getting more pleasure from my learning than I would from a vacation. And not only that, but my wife is on board. She says, she agrees. I shouldn't take a break. I'm doing better than I've ever done. I want to keep learning right through. So Rav Wolbe said, no, you're going on vacation. Vacation, he's like, Rebbe, why do I have to go on vacation? What do you want me to do? I don't need the break. He said, I want you to go to the zoo. He said, go to the biblical zoo in Yerushalayim. He said, what am I supposed to do at the zoo? So he said, I want you to go and look at every animal and tell us what that animal teaches us about Avodas Hashem. And Rav Kelman always brings the story because the first animals at the biblical zoo, if you've ever been there, are the monkeys, the monkey island. It's a monkey island. So he went with the kids to the monkey island, and he went with his kids, and he asked his kids at every exhibit, what do you think we learned from this animal? So the kids said that the monkeys teach us how to play. Because they were playing, they're having fun. And come say it exactly. Right? People are supposed to be playful, they're supposed to have fun. That was his lesson for that whole story. But Rav Wolbe's point was that the natural world is supposed to teach us about Avodas Hashem. Because we said that every animal represents an attribute of Hashem. And it's going to express something positive or negative, whatever it is that we're supposed to learn from. So you can go and understand the animal. Here we're seeing from the Ramak that it's actually impossible to a certain degree to understand Torah without understanding the physical phenomenon that the Torah is using as its metaphor. But you can't undress the Torah if you don't know what it means. If it says an aryeh, a lion, and you've never seen a lion, or you haven't read a book about a lion at least, so then how are you going to know what it means that Yehuda is an aryeh? Like, what does that mean? You won't know what it means. You'll try to learn Rashi, but I'm sure someone had to have seen it at some point. So that's going to teach you how to unlock Torah is through the physical world. So it's funny because we're really working backwards. The physical world is really a projection of Torah, but unfortunately we're not standing in the projector booth, so we can't look at the film. We're standing by the screen. So if you want to know what's on the film, so you have to study the screen. So we have to study the physical phenomenon in the world, and then we work backwards to understanding what the Torah actually means. And that's really, in the previous source that we don't have on the sheet, but the Ramchal said, that's how Nevuah works. That's how a prophet sees these visions. That's what happens. He's in the higher world, and he's actually seeing the film. not the projection. But it looks like the animals, like the metaphors, but he's seeing it in its true form. He doesn't see it as an animal. He's actually experiencing the messages that Hashem is delivering, but Hashem has to convert it into pictures, into images, into hirhurim. Right? This is also the concept of dreams. When a person dreams, they could have a lot of symbolism in them. You can look in the Gemara about the different symbolism of different dreams. But when you're dreaming, your neshama is seeing messages from Hashem that are converted into images. And then if you understand the images, you can understand the message, right? You have to move backwards because you're stuck in this world, so you can't go to the source. You have to move backwards. So this is a very fascinating idea from the Ramak. And he says, Fatam, the reason is שהתמונה הפנימית תתלבש בחיצונה כדרך שפירשו, ומה שמורה בחיצונה בגשמי הנה כך וכך דוגמא וברוחני יהיה כך וכך. He says, literally, you can learn it detail by detail. Don't stop in one place. When you see a lion and it says, or let's say, it says, Az kenamer, so be bold or brazen like a leopard. So I have no idea what that means, I'll be honest with you. I looked at one parish, the Sforno says that you know how you make a leopard? He says, I forget the two, one animal was like a warthog, and I believe, I forget if it was a lion or some sort of ferocious cat, that when the cat is in heat, it makes some noise that attracts the warthog and they mate by accident and it makes a leopard. So since it's a mamzer, or it's a certain so it has this brazen quality to it. That's what he says. So it's evidently maybe not a leopard. I don't know. I don't know I'm not a zoologist. I don't think that's how leopards are made, but maybe the first one. But evidently there's a certain brazen, bold attitude of a leopard. So your homework is go on National Geographic or Discovery and find out what that is. What does it mean, Az Kenamer? You can go look at the Rishonim, but the Ramak just told us that's not your best bet. Your best bet is to go look at a leopard. If it says you have to be Kal Kenesher, so what does it mean, Kal Kenesher? It'd be, light and fleet like a deer. So most of the Perushim, the Rishonim say, Kal Kenesher. Yeah, light like a nesher. Oh, sorry, Ratz Ketzvi. So you have to run. You have to run like a tzvi. To run like a deer. So how does a deer run? So most of the Mefarshim say it means to run away from evil or from temptation or something negative. To run away from bad things. So how does a deer run away from danger? Even when it hears the crack of this thing, it's already running. It's so fast. Even at the slightest hint of danger, it's already off to the races. So that's definitely one of the lessons. But when it sees headlights, it suddenly stops. I don't know, what does that mean? You think about it. I don't know if all animals stop in headlights, but it stops in headlights. So, okay, it's going to teach you something about what it says, be Kal Kenesher, so you should, Ratz Ketzvi, so run like a tzvi, but if you get stuck in the headlights, then maybe you should pause. Maybe if you pause, you get hit by a car, so it's not a good, I'm not sure. Kal Kenesher, you have to be light like an eagle. So I don't know in what way an eagle is light, I'm not sure. I don't know how it's lighter than other birds.
If you end up putting yourself in the spotlight and not moving out of it, and put yourself in danger.
It's not really,
Good.
Not really lighter.
Nice.
It's really it just glides very
fly up
And they swoop
very,
down. Lots of
very
animals.
gracefully. It just glides like
There's
it's,
animals that
like
glide
it's a
more
feather.
than an eagle. Okay, I
It
hear.
doesn't- without flapping its wings very often. It
It's
just
actually known for
glides.
soaring.
Soaring.
Kind of like gliding, or lighter. They look light on.
So you should serve Hashem with that soaring. I don't know what that would mean, right? You have to, so the Ramak says you want to understand what it means. So go look at an eagle for a while and see how that relates to Avodas Hashem. So what? Vision, yeah.
It's not even
But here it says to be Kal Kenesher. We're focusing on the kalness.
What's making them how they're rising on hot air? So if you keep yourself in areas where the current is rising, you're in good shape.
In good shape. See, everybody can understand on his own. This is what this Torah is telling us. That really, to understand the depth of Torah, you can kind of back into the pshat of what it's telling us. Okay.
It's beautiful.
That's how we understand the physical world. And I guess I think we're gonna save the next part for next time to finally end the shir at 9:45 when it was supposed to end, unless people want to go. I don't know if we should go to the next topic because it's really a whole nother idea. We will tie it into Purim, so we'll get to Purim. But I guess I'll just give you food for thought, and then we'll get into it next year. But it's good to think about already before we get there. But we just learned that there's many different layers of Torah. right, that already begin in the higher worlds and that trickle down to the lower worlds. And there's some aspects of Torah that are sustaining Kedusha, that are sustaining mitzvahs and the holy things in the world. But there's also aspects of Torah and attributes of Hashem, because that's what Torah is, that are sustaining evil, that are sustaining Nazis, that are sustaining some very negative things in the world. Apparent evil. Or there's Hester Panim. There's where Hashem is hiding himself in the world. Right? That also reflects itself in Torah. It reflects itself in the Torah of the times. And the times are going to reflect the Torah that's developed during those periods of history. That's another thing to keep in mind. That, right, the world is always going to reflect the Torah of the times. The Torah of the times. There's going to be different layers of Torah. There's going to be a Torah that Amalek fights against, and a Torah that Amalek will be able to live with. There were the Greeks that fought against Torah Sheba'al Peh, but not Torah Shebichsav. Right? Torah is much deeper than a book. That's what we're trying to understand here. And therefore, our enemies are also going to reflect different facets of Torah. That's one thing to keep in mind. And the holidays that we have are also going to reflect different aspects of Torah. So next year, hopefully, we're going to explore Purim. Purim and maybe Yom Kippur to kind of try to understand the opposite extremes, which we say Yom Kippur is Yom Kippurim. It's a day that's like Purim. Purim is the highest of the highs. Yom Kippur is Yom Kippurim. It's the highest of the highs. What do you mean Hashem's name isn't found in the Megillah? The Megillah, again, is a piece of Torah. It's a piece of Torah without Hashem's name. But it says Melech all over the place. Malchus, right? So we'll understand maybe a little bit of Malchus. The Melech, it's a battle against Amalek, which is the antithesis of Torah. That's who we're fighting on Purim. We're fighting Amalek. The Midrash says that La'asid Lavo, all the books of Tanakh are going to be batel, except for the Megillah. So there's also an aspect of the Megillah that's holier than every other book of Tanakh. That's more elevated, although it doesn't have the name of Hashem in it. So these are all ideas that the Torah will express itself in the reality, and that we'll have to understand what's the avoda of Purim. How is that connected to drinking Adel Yada, to Mishta V'Simcha, to Mishloach Manos, to Matanos Evyonim, to Lech Knos Kol HaYehudim. There's a lot of details within Purim. So this is going to teach us, is like a lesson of how we can approach Torah with a new depth and a new lens to try to unwrap what Hashem is telling us, which is ultimately going to trickle down into the avoda of the day. How you're supposed to treat the day, what you're supposed to connect with during the day, what the mitzvahs are designed to inculcate and to develop within a person. All of that is going to surround the flavor of the Torah of that Yom Tov, and the event of the Yom Tov, and everything in between. So Zara Hashem will do that next time.